Good evening, students. Today we're going to be focusing on the third stage of the French Revolution. As it was noted by Charles Dickens, liberty, equality, fraternity, or death, the last much easier to bestow. O guillotine. So today our notes will be on the third stage of the revolution, the crisis stage. So please, during the video, record the information as it fits into each of the categories of the revolution. Radicals take control, war, centralization of power in a revolutionary council dominated by a strongman, and then lastly, terror and virtue. Thank you, and if you have any questions, please write them down as well. So where we left off was the establishment of the Legislative Assembly and the abolishment of the monarchy to an extent. Now, obviously, Louis XVI was not happy about this, and he sought help from the Austrian royal family, his wife's family. Nobles who fled the revolution to live abroad, known as émigrés, also hoped to gain foreign help and establish or reestablish the old regime in France. Church officials wanted their land back, and they also wanted their rights and privileges restored. Some devout Catholic peasants also would support the church. This leads to the formation of political parties representing different issues. The Girondists, who were the more moderates, and the Jacobins, who would become very, very revolutionary. In the midst of losing all his power, Louis XVI and his family decided it was best to hightail it out of France and get to Austria, where they would be protected by Marie Antoinette's brother. However, they were discovered fleeing, and they were brought back into Paris, and this time they were placed under house arrest, unable to leave. At this point, there was much opposition to the new government, specifically from Europe's other absolute monarchs who feared the revolution would spread to their own country. France was invaded by Austrian and Prussian troops. What this did was it brought people to support the new government rather than distrust the new government. In an uproar, the Commune took control of Paris, led by a fiery speaker named Georges Danton, who was a member of the Jacobin political party. Voters began electing new representatives for a new convention, which would rewrite the Republican Constitution in France yet again. Now, a republic is a government in which the people elect the representatives that create laws on their behalf. Now, there was thought that many of the nobles were egging the Austrians on, and in this way, thousands of them were executed as conspirators of a foreign invasion, thus becoming the first bloody victims of the revolution. So at this point, another convention was called from September 22nd, 1792, and it was the establishment of the First French Republic. These people faced domestic opposition and strife. Now, essentially, it was broken into two different parts. There was the Girondists, who were moderates, who represented the rich middle class of the provinces, and they sat on the right-hand side of the hall. And there was the Jacobins, and these were led by Jean-Paul Marat, Georges Danton, and Maximilien Robespierre. And they represented the workers, and they sat on the left of the hall. Now, besides opposition in the country, they faced opposition from abroad, specifically in terms of what we would call a coalition army from the European powers noted here. At this point, Louis XVI was seen as an enemy of the state. As long as the royal family lived, the people understood that the monarchy could be restored if the wars went bad for them. So the Jacobins decided to put the royal couple on trial for treason. The conviction was essentially a foregone conclusion. This is what we would call a kangaroo court. Louis XVI was guillotined on January 21st, 1793, and Marie Antoinette would be guillotined on October 16th, 1793. Now, the daughter, Maria Theresa, would be able to live out her days in Austria, where unfortunately the son, Louis Charles, would die at 10 years old in a prison in Paris after mistreatment. This is the beginning of what we refer to as the Terror, where the Jacobins essentially take power and kind of sideline everybody else and begin to eliminate all enemies that they perceive of the revolution via guillotine, as we will see in the next picture. In the old days of the Ancien regime, nobles and commoners were executed in different ways. However, in the revolution, they would be killed all the same way by something that they referred to as the national razor, a guillotine, which is essentially a large blade on a track that falls when a lever is pulled and cuts the head off of the person laying below it. Now, affectionately, it worked very well. However, if you were one of the last people to be guillotined during the day, you would possibly have to have 2 to upwards of 3 drops before your head would be severed, making it extremely painful and extremely brutal. Now, under the rule of the Jacobins, blood would remain supreme. Now, the most 3 important rulers of the Jacobins, or leaders of the Jacobins, were Georges Danton, Maximilien Robespierre, and Jean-Paul Marat. Each one of these men spoke out very clearly about why and how blood needed to be used to grease the wheels of revolution. This, unfortunately, would lead to the death of all 3 of them. First off would be Jean-Paul Marat, who spent most of his time in a bathtub because of a debilitating skin illness that he contracted while living in the sewers of Paris. He was eventually forced to basically spend most of his time in a medicated bath, where he would be assassinated by Charlotte Corday, a Gironist sympathizer who thought the revolution had gone too far. This is a famous painting of the death of Marat, where he was stabbed to death in his bathtub by Corday, by Louis David. So as radicals were taking over the French government, countries around the world were forming a coalition against them. This included most notably Austria, the Holy Roman Empire, and specifically England, who always came to the aid of whoever was fighting against the French, and who definitely needed to pay France back because they let the Americans take their colonies from them. While the French were not known as the best fighters, the convention would draft Frenchmen into the army to defeat the foreign coalitions. They fought extremely hard under fear that a military occupation under any one of the countries might restore the old regime, even with the death of the Bourbon kings. Eventually, this would lead to a writing of a new French national anthem, the Marseillaise, that would be played before they went into battle. And after 2 years, the coalition would be defeated with the help of Napoleon Bonaparte, and France would gain territory rather than lose territory. Now, while these wars are happening, we see the most sensational part of the revolution start, what becomes known as the Reign of Terror. So basically, despite the military success, the convention continued to face problems domestically. You had many people kind of coming up against or questioning the revolution. So Danton and his Jacobin party decided to dominate French politics through what we would call the Committee of Public Safety. The committee's main goal was to keep the people safe, and essentially by people they meant the revolution. Now, originally headed by Danton until he would lose his head to the Committee of Public Safety, and later Maximilien Robespierre. Basically what they would do is have what we would refer to as kangaroo courts, where somebody would be tried for treason in the morning and executed in the evening. Essentially, if you were tried for treason, the result was already foregone, and that you certainly would be meeting your fate at the hands of the national razor. Now, approximately about 15,000 to 40,000 people died via guillotine during the Terror. Most notably, Olympia de Georges, Georges Danton himself, and then later the actual leader of the Committee of Public Safety, Maximilien Robespierre, would also die via guillotine. Now, the Reign of Terror was meant to support the revolution and weed out people who were anti-revolutionary. But what essentially it became, especially to the leaders of the Committee of Public Safety, it was something of an enemies list, where they were able to identify people that they did not get along with or did not like and eliminate them, because even an accusation via the Committee of Public Safety was enough for you to end up dead. Now, this is the idea that eventually revolutions get hijacked and taken over by the most extreme people within the revolution. And this extreme person would be Maximilien Robespierre. Essentially, anybody within the revolution who said, hey, you know what, we're executing innocent people and they all can't be enemies of the revolution, would be executed, including many members of the Girondist party as well as the Jacobins themselves. Like I said, even Georges Danton would be executed, executed by the guillotine during the Reign of Terror. Eventually, Maximilien Robespierre would become so feared and so disliked that eventually they would try to figure out a way to get rid of him. So in what we call the Thermidorian reaction, which was the name of the month of July as named by the Committee of Public Safety, who tried to rid France of anything of or any remnants of the Catholic Church, including the calendar, he would eventually be executed by the Committee of Public Safety as an enemy of the state. So he died on July 28th, 1794, thus ending the Reign of Terror and creating a return back to somewhat normal that we will cover in our next lecture. There you have it. That is stage 3 of the French Revolution, the crisis stage. Radical state control, the country goes to war, a madman or a strong man grips the country, and wreaks a campaign of terrorism throughout the country. Please check your notes to make sure that you have all of the pertinent information. Please summarize your notes by answering the following question. Was the Reign of Terror justified? Why or why not? Use information from the notes to back up your answer. Thank you.